Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, this is dated 2012. Scientology, the Apollo series. Emails with Stephen Manning. I have been trying to get a hold of Steve ever since I saw that haunting post. Finally, he contacted me and wrote the following. A few personal bits have been removed for his protection. Life aboard Scientology's ship, the Apollo, in 1968. Posting of Steve Manning, dated 8 March 2000. Hold on a minute here. I was 12 years old and witnessed children younger than myself being thrown into the chain locker. How many times have we heard this, you guys? A room for storing the anchor while at sea. For days on end. How more children didn't die because of this? Until they persuaded the ethics officer that they were not enemies. Physical abuse of children was rife. I'm going to click on this. I'm not sure what this is. Okay. November 13th. To me. Hi, Sharon. We were on the Sea Org during the summer of 1968. I was 10 years old. My mom was the chief cook and often in liability for giving food to people who were not supposed to have it. My brother Nick was posted to the engine room. My sister Kay, I can't remember what she did. My sister Byrony was in the nursery. And I was a messenger to a man named Dick Lardy. Not sure if the surname is correct, as well as being in charge of logging people and supplies on and off the ship. I had a desk directly in front of the gangplank. She's 10 years old, you guys. My shift was 12 hours a day. We joined the Royal Scotsman at Spanish Morocco. My dad wasn't allowed on board. And had to return to London. We were very upset at that. The ship sailed to Tunisia, Bizerta, and Corfu, where we finally left after an amnesty was granted to families with children of certain age. I find it very difficult to remember and get very emotional when I do remember things. I must have shut so many memories out. Here are the answers to your questions. I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but it's the first time I've tried to remember those dark, dark days in a long time. Feel free to ask any more questions. You can put my name to all I say. Kindest regards, Steve. Oh, there's more. I'm not sure who's talking to who here. I'm getting a little confused. Was it you that was sexually abused or someone else you know of? I was not sexually abused. The other kids, especially the boys, used to talk about one particular girl named Karen Rousseau. Not sure if that spelling is right, who used to have S with one of the guys on board. Myself and a few others asked her about it, and she ran off in tears, saying she couldn't talk about it. Yeah, that's abuse if it wasn't consensual and she's crying. Oh, finally, people who get it. Who was the perpetrator? I don't know. You know he knows. I wish somebody would do this for me because I can't tabulate and keep track of every single thing. If we could start a running list of who was on each ship, just for our own, because we've got to do the investigation because other people won't. Were you or whoever was involved able to complain about this, or was it hushed up? We didn't know who to go to for fear of getting into trouble, so we didn't do anything. These are kids. Did you witness any other types of abuse whilst on the Apollo? Are you willing to detail them either under your own name or anonymously? So this conversation, I'm not sure who's talking to who. There was a guy who used to dress as an officer and wore his cap with the peak pulled down his forehead. I think his name was John. Often he would wake the kids up very early in the morning and take us on the rear deck. Listen to this. Make us undress, line us up, and hose us down with cold water. This is the sadists. Because I remember listening to an account of these young boys who were in a Catholic orphanage, and they do the same sick shit like this. It's like sexual sadism for pedophilia. It probably lasted 5 minutes. I witnessed many kids going to the chain locker. There's a chain locker again. I used to listen to them crying for help, though. Oh my God, I can't, you guys. I used to listen to them crying for help through one of the vents on the forward deck. They used to cry out, "Please get me the master at arms. I know who I really am." I used to drop sweets down to them. But, the moronic, imbecilic, prestigious executives say there's no children in Scientology. You guys are going down. You're going down. My sister Byrony was in the nursery, and we were not allowed to go and see her. My mom, April, who was a cook, asked me to go to her as she couldn't leave the galley during the day. I remember Byrony crying and holding her arms up to me to pick her up, only to be ushered out by the staff on duty. Who's the mother effing staff on duty? Keep tabs on who was on this freaking ship, you guys. The Apollo. How did you finally manage to leave Scientology? I was persuaded to get back into Scientology in the early 1980s by my sister Kay, who was then working at the office of Tottenham Court Road, London. I was doing a study course downstairs one Friday. I used to attend about 4 days a week. And we were packing up about 10 p.m. The course supervisor notified me that I had to stay longer and finish as I had missed some nights. I explained that our daughter had died recently in a cot death. What is that, you guys? Our daughter had died recently in a cot death. Told you guys there were going to be more children that didn't make it. You guys know. You know. Hence the missed sessions, and I wished to get back home as my wife was not well. He shouted at me I had to stay. I shouted back that I was leaving. He then told me I was not leaving. At this point, rage took over, and I appended the study table and warned him not to threaten me. By this time, 4 or 5 guys had been sent downstairs. You see, they're just pussies. They did the same thing to that young boy. When Wally Hanks was beating him, it was like 4 guys on one person. By this time, 4 or 5 guys had been sent downstairs and were blocking the door to the staircase in an attempt to keep me there. I was angry and in no mood to be kept against my will. Walking out the front door was a release. I felt fantastic in the knowledge I would never return. I don't know what that cot death was. Were you disconnected from family, and what kind of insights did you realize from your experiences? I was never disconnected from my family. One other question. I don't think they were doing it as much then, maybe. I don't know. One other question. Are you on the decks of the Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard documentary? No, I wasn't in that piece of footage. On Friday, November 16th, 2012, Steve Manning wrote, "Hi, Sharon. First, about Karen Rousseau. Listen. She was about my age, which would be 10 or 11 years old. She was a plump girl with blonde hair, usually in a ponytail. I always remember her in a red skirt and white top. I think, but I'm not sure. She had a brother on board. One of the boys that talked about her, an S with an older man. Pedophiles. Was a lad named Tyler Turley. Again, this is going back a long time, but it's what comes to my mind, and it's what I remember. There was another lad older than us. He was about 14, who also used to talk about Karen and S. So they were all R-ing her. All these guys were R-ing her. That's why she was crying, remember? But I can't remember his name. He was tall, thin, and had blonde hair. Tall, thin, and had blonde hair. I think Karen was at the time in the chain locker. I remember he calls up the vent. This is making me very tearful. I'm crying more at remembering this than when my dad died 2 weeks ago. The hosing down took place on the poop deck at the back end of the ship. I've been trying to remember the bastard's name, but I can't. He was always in blue uniform and looked like an officer from the Gestapo. You guys think that's an accident? It's not an accident. With his cap tilted down over his face and a deadpan expression. He often held a clipboard. How I'd love to meet him now. I'd put that hose around his neck and choke the fucking life out of him. I told you in my last email my anger had subsided. It hasn't. My mother, her name was April, and she was the chief cook. She died in 2007. May she rest forever in peace. She may have entered her surname as Straussen Sykes or Sykes. She was partnered to, but never married to, Daryl Strawson Sykes, who also joined the Royal Scotsman at the same time we did. So that's another boat right there. They were R-ing that girl. It was a strange affair with my dad and Daryl living in the same house with my mom and all the kids. make sure it's still recording. Daryl was really into Scientology and apparently knew LRH well. Perhaps your checks will reveal more. My dad was skeptical about it all, but went along with it. He was refused entry onto the ship because he failed the sec check. All this ignorance. I don't know what the real reason was, but that's what we were told. You know, this is my deduction from this. They didn't want the dad on there because it sounds like he was like a real parent and he might try to protect his children. This is just because, you know, this is when it was all first starting. As far as I know, my brother and neither of my sisters were put in the chain locker. My brother Nick, however, was put to work in the forward lower deck chambers, chipping off rust with a hammer. I think he spent a couple of days there. I remember him telling me about it. At the time of being on the ship, my hair would have been a light mousy color. I don't have any photos of that time. I was on board when we crashed into another ship. Their front hit our rear one night, and all hell broke loose. I forgot which port we were in, but I do remember LRH shouting orders from one of the upper decks. You know, Sharon, I would never have remembered half this stuff if you had never asked the questions. I thought I'd locked it all away, never to come back to haunt me. It's taken me 1.5 years to write this mail. Fighting back tears and trying to push back the memories I know are there that are coming at me like an unstoppable tide. It's making me feel very bad and at the same time making me feel strong for remembering and facing up. I will stand up to any and all of them. Kindest regards to you, Steve. Sounds like some really heinous abuse was going on to the children on these boats. Just to recap, Daryl Strawson Sykes was my stepfather. And it was him who got us into Scientology and eventually onto the Sea Org. I've tried to remember who his cronies were. Nothing is coming to me. He always told us he knew Ron Hubbard personally and that he was instrumental in setting up the original personality test. Some names I remember: Neville Chamberlain, Norman Starkey, Otto and Robin Ross, Ron Pook. My mother was put into liability for giving him food he shouldn't have had. Libby Berry, Thor Sundergaard. We used to go to St. Hill quite regularly, and I got to know Arthur Hubbard well. We used to play behind the canteen and also on the building site, which is now the castle. I often asked him about his dad, but he always said he was not allowed to talk about him. I met Quentin a few times, but as he was a bit older than us, we were never friendly. You know something, Sharon? I find it so difficult to remember much about those times. When I put my mind to it, all I see is a white hollow with nothing inside. It's disassociation. It's frightening that such a large part of my childhood, although an unhappy one, seems to be wiped out. If I do remember anything else, I'll write it down and mail you. Subject: Unfortunately, I was on the Sea Org with LRH in 1968. Dated Wednesday, 8 March 2000. I was 12 years old and witnessed children younger than myself being thrown into the chain locker, a room for storing the anchor while at sea, for days on end, until they persuaded the ethics officer that they were not enemies. Physical abuse of children was rife. Cold water hose downs on the deck at 6 a.m. was a common practice. Working 12-hour days for little or no money. Sleeping in overcrowded dormitories with strange adults with strange adults led to sexual abuse. Of course it did. And all these executives, there were no kids in Scientology. Makes me wonder if they're pedos. And all this in the good name of Scientology. If any of you sick fucks who are in the business today can explain why this happened to me, especially while God himself was on board, I'll be happy to know. Until then, I'll continue to smear the name of Scientology and all that goes with it, with the shit and contempt it deserves. If anyone would like more info on the life and abuse that went on this evil ship as it sailed around the Mediterranean, I'll be happy to enlighten you. So I'm going to click on this. Let's see what happens. That's okay. So then they just explain. The following mention Daryl Sykes. I'm not going to read all that. I might be a cold-hearted person, but I don't trust people that are independent Scientologists. Oh, looky here, guys. Now, this is an old list. Looky here. John Atak was an independent Scientologist. I don't know if he still is. So you can't attack Scientology and then still be following it. It doesn't work like that. Let me see if I see any other name. It's a whole bunch of them. I don't trust them. I'm sorry. I just don't. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to scroll. Okay, guys. That's going to be it. I found another article about what children deserve regarding, autonomy, etc. I'll be reading that one tomorrow. So I will leave a link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Otherwise, have an amazing day or night wherever you are.